Ever wondered how a bookworm becomes a nightmare? Meet Doug the Thug Orr, the honor student who transformed into Hell's Angels' most terrifying enforcer. This swimming champion who once gave speeches about reading became so feared that inmates cleared paths when he walked. His rage was so legendary that after his death, some believed guards had his cell welded shut. How did this happen? You won't believe this wild ride from golden boy to Sonny Bargers' most violent nightmare. Wholesome beginnings. Douglas Flynn Orr Jr. was born on April 22, 1946 in Fresno, California, but his family soon settled in the small town of Selma, California. Growing up in this tight-knit community, young Douglas seemed to be living a life straight out of Leave It to Beaver, the quintessential all-American boy in a traditional family setting. Doug's childhood activities were so wholesome that they regularly made the local newspaper. His first birthday party, hosted by his maternal grandparents, was considered important enough to earn front-page coverage in the town paper. As he grew, his achievements in school and sports continued to keep him in the spotlight of small-town life. Swimming became Doug's athletic passion, and he excelled at it. The local papers tracked his competitions and victories, celebrating this local boy who was bringing modest fame to Selma through his aquatic achievements. By 1962, at age 16, Doug was honored at his school's Spring Awards banquet, where he received his athletic letter for swimming, cementing his status as a respected athlete in the community. But Doug wasn't just an athlete, he had brains to match his physical abilities. His academic performance earned him recognition as an honor student, gaining the respect of teachers and classmates alike. Perhaps most telling about young Douglas was his 8th grade graduation speech. As part of a small graduating class of just 20 students in 1960, Doug was selected to address his fellow graduates. His chosen topic: the importance of education through reading, a subject that highlighted his articulate nature and intellectual interests. Everything about young Doug's life pointed toward a bright future. With swimming trophies lining his shelves and academic achievements filling his transcript, the path ahead seemed clear. Perhaps college, a respectable career, maybe a family in a nice neighborhood. Nothing in this picture-perfect childhood hinted at the shocking transformation that would eventually turn this promising young man into someone who struck fear into the hearts of hardened criminals. Teachers praised his discipline and focus. Classmates admired his abilities. Parents in town likely pointed to Doug as an example of what their own children should aspire to become. With his combination of athletic prowess, academic achievement, and public speaking abilities, Doug appeared to embody the best qualities of American youth. The newspaper clippings from these early years paint a portrait of a young man destined for success through conventional channels, someone who would make his hometown proud through legitimate achievements. His participation in community activities and school functions showed a well-adjusted teenager engaged with the world around him in positive ways. This was Douglas Flynn Orr Jr., swimming champion, honor student, articulate speaker, all-American boy. Looking at photographs from this period shows a clean-cut young man with clear eyes and an open expression, the kind of teenager adults trusted and peers respected. Yet beneath this pristine surface, something lay dormant, a capacity for extreme transformation that nobody could have predicted. The same discipline and intensity that made Doug excel in the pool and classroom would eventually be channeled toward very different pursuits. The local newspaper chronicled young Douglas's life with wholesome reverence. Birthday celebrations with grandparents made front-page news, swimming competitions brought him modest fame in his community, and his academic achievements were celebrated alongside his peers. In 1960, as part of a small graduating class of just 20 students, Douglas delivered an 8th grade graduation speech on the importance of education through reading. His articulate presentation revealed an intelligent, thoughtful young man poised for success. School awards banquets honored his athletic prowess, particularly in swimming, where trophies lined his shelves. Teachers praised his discipline and focus, while classmates admired his determination. Behind this portrait of all-American virtue, however, lay subtle indicators of change. In November 1959, 12-year-old Douglas suffered a life-altering accident when his homemade four-wheeler collided with a car, breaking both his legs. The months spent in hospital beds may have altered something fundamental within him. By age 15, he mysteriously vanished one midnight, staying gone for days without explanation. These early chapters of Douglas's life tell the story of a promising young man whose trajectory would take an unimaginable turn, transforming this bookish boy into someone entirely different within just a few short years. The boy who once gave speeches about the importance of reading would, in time, become a man whose mere presence caused prison yards to go silent with fear. But before that transformation could occur, there would be warning signs, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. The all-American boy was about to experience the first of several life-altering events that would set him on a path toward becoming someone his teachers, classmates, and even his parents would scarcely recognize. Early warning signs. The first significant crack in Doug's wholesome image appeared on November 11, 1959. At just 12 years old, Doug was involved in a serious accident that would leave him forever changed. He had built a homemade four-wheeler, displaying the same ingenuity and mechanical aptitude that might have made him an engineer in another life. But when he took it out for a ride, disaster struck at the intersection of Wolf and Co. avenues. Unable to stop at the intersection, young Doug collided with a car. The impact was severe. The right front wheel of the vehicle ran over both his legs, fracturing them severely. Doctors managed to save his limbs, but the trauma was significant, requiring an extended hospital stay. Those long, painful months confined to hospital beds may have been the first turning point in Doug's life. Something about this experience, perhaps the physical pain, the helplessness, the sudden disruption of an active boy's life, or simply the dark thoughts that can take root during prolonged isolation, seemed to alter something fundamental inside him. The boy who entered the hospital wasn't quite the same as the one who eventually left. Though he physically recovered and returned to swimming, those close to Doug might have noticed subtle changes in his temperament or outlook. These changes weren't dramatic enough to raise serious concerns, but represented the first hairline fractures in his all-American facade. A more alarming incident occurred a few years later when, without explanation, 15-year-old Doug vanished from home at midnight. This wasn't a case of staying out past curfew or losing track of time with friends. He simply disappeared, remaining gone for days. When he eventually returned, questions about this unexplained absence lingered. Where had he gone? What had he been doing? Who had he been with? The answers, if Doug provided any, have been lost to history. This mysterious disappearance hinted at inner turmoil that was bubbling beneath his model student exterior. Perhaps it was typical teenage rebellion, but its suddenness and the secretive nature of his departure suggested something more troubling. Whatever drove him to run away in the middle of the night offered a glimpse of the impulsivity and disregard for rules that would later define his outlaw life. By 1962, however, Doug appeared to have overcome whatever brief rebellion had prompted his disappearance. At 16, he refocused on swimming and rebuilding his reputation. His trophy collection grew, teachers praised his comeback, and classmates admired his seeming rehabilitation. To outside observers, it looked like Doug had successfully navigated the turbulent waters of adolescence and emerged back on course. His participation in school activities resumed, his academic performance remained strong, and his athletic achievements continued. The honor student who had temporarily gone astray seemed to have returned to the fold. Parents and teachers likely breathed sighs of relief, believing the unexplained absence had been merely a temporary deviation. Yet beneath this apparent return to normalcy, unseen changes were taking place. The seeds planted during his hospital confinement and whatever experiences occurred during his mysterious disappearance were quietly germinating. The surface-level rehabilitation masked deeper currents of transformation that wouldn't become visible for several more years. Looking back, these early warning signs, the traumatic accident, the unexplained absence, the hints of rebellion, take on greater significance. They were the first indications that the all-American boy might contain multitudes that his small-town upbringing couldn't contain. The discipline that made him an excellent student and athlete could, if redirected, make him equally excellent at more troubling pursuits. Behind every violent criminal career lies a progression, subtle shifts that in retrospect signal the transformation to come. Douglas Orr's path from promising youth to feared enforcer contained warning signs visible only through history's lens. In November 1959, a seemingly routine accident marked the first turning point. 12-year-old Douglas fractured both legs when his homemade four-wheeler collided with a car, leaving him hospitalized for months. During this extended isolation, something fundamental shifted within this once sociable boy. By 15, Douglas exhibited behaviors that deviated sharply from his established character. Without explanation, he disappeared at midnight, remaining absent for days. Though he eventually returned home, questions about this unexplained absence lingered, hinting at inner turmoil. The transformation accelerated between 1964 to 1967, as Douglas abandoned his academic achievements and athletic pursuits for the Hells Angels lifestyle. His first documented criminal offense, a marijuana possession charge in July 1967, seemed minor but marked the beginning of a steep decline. By December that same year, Douglas was attacking anti-war protesters with a baseball bat. Just 13 months later, in January 1969, he committed his most chilling act, shooting 21-year-old Earl Hudson at close range with a shotgun after a trivial traffic dispute. These weren't random incidents, but a methodical escalation pattern. The boy who once delivered eloquent speeches about educational reading had transformed into a man who preferred reading terror in others' eyes. What remains haunting is how completely one identity disappeared before the other fully emerged. The honor student vanishing entirely beneath the infamous Doug the Thug persona. The years between 1962 and 1967 remain somewhat mysterious in Doug's timeline. What exactly happened during this crucial period that transformed an honor student into a Hell's Angel? The answer isn't clear, but the metamorphosis was already underway, taking place beneath the surface like geological pressure building toward a seismic event. The boy who once gave speeches about reading was slowly becoming someone else entirely, someone who would soon embrace a radically different path. Transformation.
Who were the most dangerous people you ever encountered in your life?
I encountered lots of dangerous people, but the thing is, how to put it?
Between 1964 and 1967, Doug Orr underwent a metamorphosis so complete and bewildering that it defies simple explanation. The honor student, swimming champion, and articulate speaker vanished, replaced by a hardened Hell's Angel wearing the patches of the Daly City chapter. This wasn't a gradual shift or an understandable evolution. It was a wholesale reinvention of identity so dramatic that those who knew him from both periods of his life must have struggled to reconcile the two versions of Douglas Flynn Orr Jr. In 1967, renowned photographer Irving Penn captured images of Doug as part of a series introducing the Hells Angels to mainstream America. These photographs reveal a man physically recognizable as the former swimming champion, but psychologically transformed beyond recognition. His eyes, once bright with academic ambition, had turned cold and calculating. The boyish enthusiasm that once animated his face had hardened into a mask of intimidation. Former inmates would later describe him not just as an angel, but as a straight-up berserker, someone even other angels approached with caution. What drove this radical transformation? The answer remains elusive. Perhaps the seeds planted during his hospital stay after the childhood accident finally bloomed into full-blown rebellion. Maybe his unexplained teenage disappearance connected him with influences that slowly pulled him away from his all-American trajectory. Or possibly something in his psychological makeup had always contained this potential for extreme reinvention, a capacity to channel his natural discipline and intensity toward whatever path he chose, whether constructive or destructive. Whatever the cause, the effect was undeniable. The small-town boy who once cherished books and learning now preferred reading terror in men's eyes. The student who had earned praise from teachers now earned respect through intimidation. The transformation wasn't simply about joining a motorcycle club. Many men rode with clubs without becoming feared enforcers. Doug's metamorphosis went deeper, touching something fundamental about his identity and relationship to society. This transformation wasn't just external, reflected in patches and leather. It represented a complete psychological reorientation. The values he once embraced, academic achievement, community recognition, athletic excellence, were replaced by the outlaw code of the Hells Angels, with its emphasis on loyalty to brothers, defiance of authority, and willingness to employ violence when necessary. Most striking about Doug's transformation was how completely he embraced his new identity. He didn't become a half-hearted angel or someone straddling two worlds. Instead, he threw himself into outlaw life with the same intensity and commitment that had once made him an accomplished student and athlete. The discipline that had earned him swimming trophies was now channeled into becoming the most intimidating enforcer in one of America's most notorious motorcycle clubs. By 1967, Doug had not only joined the Angels, but was rapidly building a reputation within the organization. His capacity for violence, his unflinching loyalty, and his apparent fearlessness made him valuable to the club's leadership. The qualities that might have made him successful in conventional society, determination, physical prowess, single-minded focus, found expression in his new life, but twisted toward darker purposes. Sonny Bargers, the legendary president of the Oakland Hells Angels chapter, would later describe Doug as the most violent person he ever knew. Extraordinary words coming from a man who had seen more than his share of tough characters during decades leading the world's most notorious motorcycle club. This wasn't praise so much as recognition of Doug's unique capacity for intimidation and violence, a capacity that made him useful to the organization, but also potentially dangerous to everyone around him, including fellow Angels. Between 1964 and 1967, Douglas Flynn Orr Jr. underwent a metamorphosis so profound it defies simple categorization. The clean-cut teenager who once delivered eloquent speeches about the value of reading, education evolved into a figure that would become mythologized in criminal circles for decades to come. This transformation wasn't merely physical, it was existential. The transformation between graduation and 1967 defies simple explanation, notes criminal psychologist Dr. Helena Reeves. In photographs taken by Irving Penn, we see a man wearing Hells Angels patches with cold, calculating eyes. The honor student had completely vanished. What triggers such radical change? Some point to the 1959 accident where 12-year-old Orr fractured both legs when his homemade four-wheeler collided with a car. The months of isolation during recovery may have altered something fundamental in his developing psyche. Others suggest the unexplained midnight disappearance at age 15 hinted at inner turmoil already brewing beneath his polished exterior. The physical manifestation of this transformation materialized through increasingly violent behavior. By December 1967, Orr was attacking anti-war protesters at San Jose State with a baseball bat. Just 13 months later, he shot 21-year-old Earl Hudson point-blank with a shotgun after a minor traffic dispute. An attack so severe that surgeons removed 47 pellets, Hudson's gallbladder, and portions of his large intestine, liver, and stomach. Transformation doesn't happen overnight, explains former prison psychologist Raymond Mercer. It's a process with escalating warning signs. The boy who once valued knowledge and athletic achievement became someone who valued intimidation and fear as currency. What makes Orr's transformation particularly fascinating is how it exemplifies the human capacity for radical reinvention. The swimming champion who collected trophies and academic accolades became a figure so terrifying that, according to prison law, inmates would clear pathways when he walked across San Quentin's yard. Fellow prisoners would later describe him as the toughest white boy on the yard, a reputation earned through violence so extreme it bordered on mythological. By the time of his death from a heroin overdose in his prison cell on June 26, 1986, Douglas Orr had completed his transformation from promising youth to Doug the Thug, a journey so extreme that even in death, rumors persisted he wasn't truly gone. The transformation was complete, leaving behind only legends where once stood an all-American boy. The transformation was now complete. The honor student had become the enforcer, the swimming champion had become the street fighter, the articulate speaker had become a man whose silence could terrify hardened criminals. Doug the student was dead. Doug the thug had taken his place, and this new Doug was about to have his first significant encounter with the criminal justice system. a system that would become increasingly familiar territory in the years ahead. First, major arrest. Doug's official criminal record began on July 27, 1967, with what should have been a routine traffic stop. Police pulled him over for minor vehicle code violations, checking his motorcycle's muffler and rear-view mirror. For most people, this would have resulted in nothing more than a ticket and a reminder to fix the issues. But when officers ran Doug's name, they discovered an outstanding warrant for another vehicle code violation. This minor infraction shifted the encounter from routine to problematic. The situation escalated when officers searched Doug and discovered 2 plastic bags of marijuana in his pockets. While marijuana possession might seem relatively insignificant by today's standards, it carried serious consequences in the late 1960s. This marked Doug's first documented entry into the criminal justice system, a relationship that would grow increasingly familiar and contentious over the coming years. The fall months brought mounting troubles and escalating charges. During a weekend stint in San Mateo County Jail, guards performed a routine strip search and found stimulants on Doug's person. They also noted a fresh Hells Angels tattoo prominently displayed across his chest, a walking advertisement of his new allegiance and lifestyle. But this first arrest and jail stay were merely the opening act in what would become an increasingly violent criminal career. By December 1967, Doug graduated to his first violent offense on public record. He attacked anti-war protesters at San Jose State University, wielding a baseball bat while his companion carried a metal pipe. This assault revealed the political dimensions of Hells Angels culture. Given many Angels' connections to military service, they viewed anti-war protesters as unpatriotic enemies deserving punishment. Of course, beating civilians with baseball bats hardly qualified as patriotic service, regardless of one's views on the Vietnam conflict. The following year brought another violent encounter, this time with law enforcement. At Redwood City's only topless pool hall, an establishment whose very existence raised questions about the local licensing board, chaos erupted in the parking lot. During the melee, Doug struck a deputy from behind, a serious error in judgment. The officer responded by introducing Doug to his canine partner. As it turns out, police dogs don't appreciate surprise attacks on their handlers. Between nightstick blows and canine dental work, Doug suffered a broken hand. This painful education in the consequences of assaulting law enforcement officers might have encouraged most people to reconsider their life choices. For Doug, however, it seemed to be merely another experience in an escalating pattern of violence and confrontation with authority. Each arrest, each charge, each painful consequence only seemed to harden his commitment to outlaw life rather than prompt reconsideration. What made these early encounters with law enforcement particularly notable was Doug's apparent nonchalance about the consequences. He seemed either unable or unwilling to calculate the long-term implications of accumulating a criminal record. Perhaps he believed his growing reputation within the Hells Angels provided some form of immunity from serious consequences, or maybe he simply lacked the imagination to consider that his freedom might eventually be curtailed. Whatever his thinking, Doug's pattern of escalating criminal behavior suggested a man increasingly comfortable with violence and increasingly detached from conventional social constraints. The swimming champion who once received athletic letters at school banquets was rapidly transforming into someone police departments across Northern California would come to recognize on sight. By July 1967, the transformation of Douglas Orr from promising young athlete to outlaw biker was complete. His first documented brush with law enforcement occurred on a quiet summer evening when Los Altos police officers conducted a routine traffic stop simply to check the muffler and rear-view mirror on his motorcycle. When the officer ran Orr's name through the system, an outstanding warrant appeared for a previous vehicle code violation. What began as a simple traffic violation quickly escalated, explains former California Highway Patrol officer James Braddock. The officers conducted a standard search and discovered 2 plastic bags of marijuana in Orr's pocket. In 1967, this wasn't just a citation, it was a serious criminal offense. The discovery of marijuana marked Orr's official entrance into the criminal justice system, but barely hinted at the violence that would follow. During a subsequent weekend in San Mateo County Jail, Guards discovered stimulants during his strip search and noted a fresh Hell's Angels tattoo emblazoned across his chest, a physical manifestation of his new identity. By December of that same year, Orr's criminal behavior escalated dramatically when he attacked anti-war protesters at San Jose State University, wielding a baseball bat while his companion used a metal pipe. The violence reflected the Hells Angels' military connections and their view of protesters as unpatriotic enemies. This pattern of escalation is textbook, notes criminal psychologist Dr. Melinda Hargrove. First, we see minor offenses, followed by increasingly bold public displays of aggression. Each confrontation with authority reinforces the outlaw identity. In 1968, Orr's violent tendencies continued at a topless pool hall in Redwood City, where he struck a deputy from behind during a parking lot melee. The officer's K-9 partner responded, leaving Orr with a broken hand. A painful lesson that did nothing to deter his growing appetite for confrontation. The brutal attack left Hudson critically wounded. Surgeons removed 47 shotgun pellets from his body, along with his gallbladder and portions of his large intestine, liver, and stomach. Remarkably, Hudson survived to identify his attacker. Police quickly raided 4 Hells Angels hangouts, finding Orr in Menlo Park, seemingly unconcerned about the attempted murder charges that would soon alter the trajectory of his life forever and cement his reputation as Doug the Thug. These first encounters with the criminal justice system, while serious, gave little indication of the shocking violence that lay ahead. Doug was building a criminal resume, but his most infamous act, the one that would ultimately send him to San Quentin and cement his reputation as Doug the Thug, was still to come. A trivial traffic dispute would soon escalate into a crime so violent that it would define his legacy and set him on a path from which there was no return. Violent crimes.
And made my way back. Wasn't long after that. I was arrested myself by the FBI, and I wound up in Terminal Island. And it was in Terminal Island when I found out, first time I'd been arrested and been down, and that's when I found out.
January 29, 1969, marked Doug's descent into truly shocking violence. What began as a trivial traffic dispute, exchanged middle fingers at an intersection, escalated into a nightmare that would forever change multiple lives, including Doug's own. The incident started when 21-year-old Earl Hudson encountered a car full of Hells Angels at an intersection. The Angels flipped Hudson off, and Hudson responded in kind, a momentary expression of road frustration that would have been forgotten by most people within minutes. Hudson drove home, putting the incident out of his mind, unaware that the Angels had taken personal offense and were following him. Minutes after Hudson arrived home, the Angels tracked him down. While Hudson's terrified wife hid trembling in a closet, the Angels broke down their front door with terrifying efficiency, the kind that suggested this wasn't their first home invasion. Realizing the danger, Hudson tried escaping over the backyard fence, but the Angels caught him. What happened next crossed the line from intimidation to attempted murder. As they were walking Hudson back toward the house, someone, allegedly Doug, shot Hudson at point-blank range with a shotgun. The damage was catastrophic. Surgeons at Alexian Brothers Hospital removed 47 pellets from Hudson's body, along with his gallbladder and portions of his large intestine, liver, and stomach. Remarkably, Hudson survived this brutal attack and was able to identify his shooter. In the twisted economy of outlaw violence, this qualified as a botched job. Doug had failed to permanently silence his victim. Now, with a living witness who could identify him, Doug faced serious legal consequences for the first time in his criminal career. Law enforcement quickly raided 4 Angel hangouts searching for Doug the Thug before finding him in Menlo Park. He seemed unconcerned about the attempted murder charges, perhaps believing his growing reputation provided immunity from consequences, or maybe simply unable to grasp the seriousness of shooting someone over a trivial traffic dispute. Facing potential decades in prison, Doug pivoted to an unexpected defense strategy. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity on February 14, 1969. For a man whose reputation centered on intimidating hardened criminals, claiming mental instability seemed contradictory, but the courts took his claims seriously enough to order psychiatric evaluations. 3 different psychiatrists examined Doug but couldn't reach consensus on his mental state. The first doctor, Dr. John Peshaw of Agnew State Hospital, insisted he was genuinely insane, noting that Doug kept babbling about a ghost that follows me, his father's ghost giving him instructions. Doug reportedly said, "It follows me about all the time. It's my father. It tells me everything I do. It told me to cut myself." The second psychiatrist, Dr. Melvin Shaw from San Jose, found zero evidence of mental illness, while the third suspected Doug was faking everything. Under these conflicting opinions, the court decided to err on the side of caution and committed Doug to Agnew State Hospital. This decision would prove fateful, as psychiatric walls proved even less capable of containing Doug the Thug than prison barriers would have been. Within just 1 month of commitment, he orchestrated an audacious escape that would become part of his growing legend. Along with 7 fellow patients, Doug soared through window bars and the group slid down a drainpipe. While 5 of the escapees quickly surrendered, Doug vanished completely. Hell's Angels folklore adds dramatic flair to this escape. According to Sonny Bargers himself, a rescue team from the club broke Doug out. The Angels' motivation reportedly went beyond mere loyalty. The hospital had scheduled electroshock treatments for Orr, and some whispered about potential lobotomy plans. Whether truth or embellishment, the story significantly enhanced Doug's larger-than-life reputation as a man even institutional walls couldn't contain. During his 3 months as a fugitive, Doug apparently missed his dog enough to risk recapture. Police suspected he broke into a Humane Society facility to retrieve his white German Shepherd. Only Doug would risk freedom for canine companionship. His freedom eventually ended on October 10, 1969, when police caught him returning a borrowed car. In his possession, a .38 caliber handgun and a one-way ticket to Vancouver, suggesting he understood the seriousness of his situation, but was caught before he could flee the country. The court, thoroughly tired of Doug's antics, conducted a second sanity hearing. This time, judges determined he had been perfectly sane while shooting Earl Hudson. With an attempted murder conviction, he received consecutive sentences totaling potentially 19 years. Just before his 24th birthday, Doug entered San Quentin's imposing gates, beginning a new chapter where his particular talents for violence and intimidation would find their truest expression in one of America's most notorious prisons. Plea of insanity and escape.
He goes for a diminished capacity defense. And the reason he suffered diminished capacity is because he'd eaten 3 Hostess Twinkies for breakfast. It's called the Twinkie defense.
I've heard of this, Twinkie defense.
He ate 3 Hostess Twinkies, and the blood sugar...
Facing attempted murder charges for shooting Earl Hudson point blank with a shotgun, Doug Orr made a surprising tactical pivot. On February 14, 1969, he entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. For a man whose reputation centered on intimidating hardened criminals, claiming mental instability seemed contradictory. But the courts took his claims seriously enough to order psychiatric evaluations. 3 different psychiatrists examined Doug with wildly different conclusions. Dr. John Peshaw of Agnew State Hospital believed Orr was genuinely insane. According to his notes, Doug kept babbling about a ghost that follows me. Doug claimed this ghost was his father's spirit, telling him, "It follows me about all the time. It's my father. It tells me everything I do. It told me to cut myself." This testimony painted a disturbing picture of a man haunted by paranoid delusions. The second doctor, Dr. Melvin Shaw from San Jose, completely disagreed, finding absolutely no evidence of mental illness. Meanwhile, the third psychiatrist suspected Doug was faking everything, essentially playing the system to avoid prison. With such conflicting professional opinions, the court erred on the side of caution and committed Doug to Agnew State Hospital instead of prison. But psychiatric walls proved even less capable of containing Doug the Thug than prison barriers would have been. Within just 1 month of commitment, he orchestrated an audacious escape that would become part of his growing legend. Along with 7 fellow patients, Doug soared through window bars and the group slid down a drainpipe like deranged firefighters making a quick exit. While 5 of the escapees quickly surrendered, Doug vanished completely. Hell's Angels folklore adds dramatic flair to this escape. According to Sonny Bargers himself, the president of the Oakland Hells Angels. The Angels' motivation reportedly went beyond mere loyalty. The hospital had scheduled electroshock treatments for Orr, and some whispered about potential lobotomy plans. He was in a psychiatric ward, and he was getting court-ordered shock treatments, and on the horizon they were talking about a possible lobotomy, claimed one angel. Whether truth or embellishment, the story significantly enhanced Doug's larger-than-life reputation as a man even institutional walls couldn't contain. During his 3 months as a fugitive, Doug apparently missed his dog. Police suspected he broke into a Humane Society facility to retrieve his white German Shepherd. Only Doug would risk recapture for canine companionship. His priorities, much like his mental state, remained uniquely his own. Freedom eventually ended on October 10, 1969, when police caught him returning a borrowed car. In his possession, a .38 caliber handgun and a one-way ticket to Vancouver. The international escape plan revealed Doug understood the seriousness of his situation, but unfortunately for him, that understanding came 3 months too late. Prison reputation.
On July the 27th, 1967, Orr was pulled over by Los Altos police in a routine traffic stop to check the muffler and rearview mirror on his motorcycle.
San Quentin greeted Doug Orr like it had been expecting him. Within the concrete maze of California's oldest prison, he quickly established a fearsome reputation that would follow him throughout his incarceration. Unlike on the streets where the Hells Angels dominated, prison yards belonged to 4 major gangs with established territories and hierarchies. For most new inmates, this complex ecosystem required careful navigation, but Doug adapted with a natural instinct for prison politics. What set Doug apart was that he didn't just survive in prison, he thrived. A 1977 San Quentin News photo captured Doug among fellow angels, receiving thanks from the prison administration for organizing motorcycle shows and concerts. Behind these seemingly innocent activities lurked more practical arrangements. The Angels smuggled contraband during these events and paid business fees to other prison gangs to maintain peaceful operations. Despite the Hells Angels' dominance on the streets, prison yards belonged to established gangs like the Mexican Mafia, Aryan Brotherhood, Black Guerrilla Family, and La Nuestra Familia. Doug navigated this complex ecosystem masterfully, forming strategic alliances rather than instigating unnecessary conflicts. We became friends with other prison gangs. Although the Hells Angels wasn't a prison gang, they were watched by the prison authorities. They became friends with the AB, Aryan Brotherhood, the Mexican Mafia, and pretty much had sway on the yard because of guys like Doug, recalled one former inmate. Former prisoners spoke of Doug in hushed, reverential tones decades later. One described him simply as the toughest white boy on the yard, high praise in an environment where hyperbole about toughness was common currency. This reputation made him a natural target for those looking to make their own names, but challengers typically regretted their decisions quickly and permanently. In one legendary incident that cemented his reputation, several Black Guerrilla family members attacked him simultaneously. During the assault, they gouged a baseball-sized chunk from his calf muscle, an injury that would have sent most men into shock. Doug not only survived without seeking medical attention, but also declined to seek revenge, understanding that the incident itself would amplify his growing mythology more effectively than retaliation. Stories about his physical capabilities bordered on supernatural. Fellow inmates claimed he could break handcuffs with his bare hands, a feat that became part of his mystique, whether true or not. In a fit of strength, he broke a pair of handcuffs, one witness attested years later, still sounding amazed. Soon his reputation extended beyond verified incidents to include rumors and possibly exaggerated tales. During a temporary release, Doug attended a motorcycle run in Sturgis, South Dakota. Fresh from prison and carrying what witnesses called his prison swagger, he commanded extraordinary respect. Doug showed up there, and he had just returned from prison. It was early 80s, and Doug walked down the middle of the street in Sturgis, looking for outlaws. The street parted like the Red Sea, one observer noted with almost religious awe. Doug's influence grew even as his psychology remained mysterious to others. His capacity for shocking violence contrasted with his strategic intelligence. While many feared him, others sought his protection and guidance. Throughout the prison system, his name became shorthand for unmatched ferocity. San Quentin's hardened population included murderers, rapists, and career criminals with extensive violent histories. Somehow, among these predators, Doug established himself as the apex threat. His method combined calculated intimidation with unpredictable explosions of force. Between these extremes, he created a persona that would outlive his physical existence and transform into something almost mythological among prison populations across California. Legendary status. By the early 1980s, Doug the Thug Orr had transcended from merely being feared to achieving something approaching mythic status in outlaw circles. Stories about him took on lives of their own, growing with each retelling until it became difficult to separate the man from the legend. What made his reputation so enduring wasn't just his capacity for violence. Plenty of men in prison could claim that distinction, but the stark contrast between his beginnings and what he became. The fact that this feared enforcer had once been an honor student who gave graduation speeches about reading created a psychological fascination that other criminals couldn't match. This dramatic transformation suggested something both terrifying and compelling, that anyone, even the most wholesome all-American boy, might contain the seeds of such darkness. It wasn't just that Doug was dangerous, it was that his existence challenged comfortable assumptions about human nature itself. Sonny Bargers, the legendary president of the Oakland Hells Angels chapter, and a man not known for exaggeration about toughness, described Doug as the most violent person he ever knew. Coming from Bargers, who had seen more than his share of violence and dangerous men during his decades leading the world's most notorious motorcycle club, this assessment carried extraordinary weight. It wasn't praise so much as a warning. Doug existed in a category entirely his own. Even among hardened convicts, mention of Doug's name could change the atmosphere in a room. Former inmates described how younger prisoners would fall silent when stories about him began, listening with a mixture of fascination and dread. His exploits became cautionary tales, shared in hushed tones between prison bunks after lights out. Did he really break those handcuffs? Did he really survive having a chunk of muscle ripped from his leg without screaming? The answers mattered less than the questions themselves. Doug had become larger than factual reality. What cemented his legendary status wasn't just his actions, but how he carried himself. The prison swagger witnesses described at Sturgis wasn't mere bravado. It was the physical embodiment of absolute confidence. When people described how the street parted like the Red Sea as he walked through crowds, they weren't just describing physical movement, but a psychological impact few men could generate simply by existing in a space. His presence alone could transform environments, creating tension, fear, and a strange kind of respect, even among those who despised what he represented. By 1985, Doug had secured parole and strategically planted himself in Oakland, living directly across from Sonny Bargers' home. This wasn't coincidence, but calculation, positioning himself at the power center of the Hells Angels organization. He transferred from the Daly City chapter to the Oakland chapter, placing himself where his particular skills would be most valuable to the club's leadership. The move suggested not just loyalty, but ambition. Doug wasn't content to be merely feared, but sought to transform his reputation into organizational influence. His freedom proved fleeting. When the FBI launched Operation Rough Rider in May 1985, their nationwide sweep targeted Hells Angels drug operations across America. With 125 arrests disrupting the club's activities, federal authorities raided Doug's house and discovered a firearm in his truck. Given his felony record, this guaranteed his return to prison. The federal judge sentenced him to 6 years, and Doug headed to Lewisburg United States Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. Behind these new walls, old habits resurfaced with deadly consequences. According to George Christie, Doug developed a heroin habit common among long-term inmates. Doug had a habit, if you will, and some of the guys did. They weren't supposed to use heroin or needles, but guys in prison were doing pretty much what they wanted, and especially a guy like Doug. You know, how are you going to tell Doug what to do? He was going to do what he wanted. The rhetorical question revealed the extent of Doug's untouchable status. Even when breaking club rules that could get ordinary members severely beaten or killed, nobody dared confront him about his violations. His legendary status had reached such heights that even his death would become surrounded by controversy and conspiracy theories. The man who had built a reputation on terrifying California's toughest criminals couldn't just die. His end would need to match the extraordinary life he had led, whether in reality or in the minds of those who feared and admired him. Demise.
By 1985, Doug the Thug had paroled and was living across the street from Sonny Bargers and had moved from the Daly City chapter to the Oakland chapter of the Hells Angels. On May the 2nd, 1985,
On June 26, 1986, the legend of Doug the Thug ended unceremoniously in a prison cell at Lewisburg Penitentiary. There were no last stands, no dramatic confrontations, just a 40-year-old man alone with his demons and a needle. Doug Orr overdosed on heroin without witnesses or assistance, his body discovered during routine cell checks by correctional officers. For a man whose life had been filled with violence and spectacle, his death came quietly, almost privately. Doug OD'd in his prison cell by himself, one Hells Angel later explained. There was nothing shady about it. We never felt that it was a setup or a hot shot or anything like that. No conspiracies, no assassination plots, just the predictable end of a habitual heroin user who miscalculated his dose. The man who had terrorized California's toughest criminals and survived multiple attempts on his life ultimately died by his own hand through self-administered poison. The timing had a certain irony. At 40 years old, Doug might have had another chance at parole soon. After decades of institutionalization, violence, and addiction, there was perhaps a chance, however slim, of reintegration into society. Instead, he became another statistic in America's ongoing prison drug epidemic. His end, as mundane as his legend, had been extraordinary. News of his death sparked heated debate within the Hells Angels organization. The by-the-book faction opposed giving him a proper funeral, citing his clear violation of club rules against heroin use. In the Hells Angels code, shooting a man almost to death might be excused as club business, but drug addiction, particularly to heroin, carried a special stigma. The club had built its identity partly on controlling the supply of drugs, rather than succumbing to them. There was a faction in the club that were strict, by-the-book guys, and they didn't want Doug to have that Hells Angel funeral, recalled one member. These hardliners viewed his addiction as a betrayal of everything the patch represented: strength, control, and indomitability. To them, Doug had shown weakness unbecoming of a Hells Angel, let alone one of his legendary status. Nevertheless, others argued his contributions outweighed his transgressions. Doug's years of service, his fearsome reputation that had benefited the club in countless confrontations, and his unwavering loyalty through decades of imprisonment counted for something. There was a big contingency that wanted Doug to have it, a funeral, and didn't care what happened or how he died, the same member explained. Gallows humor circulated alongside grief during these discussions. Some joked that members approved his funeral because they feared Doug wasn't really dead. Perhaps they worried he might return seeking vengeance against those who denied him proper respects. Ultimately, in the end, Doug got his funeral. Perhaps because if Doug really wasn't dead, maybe there were people that were scared to go against him. I don't know. It was kind of a joke around the club, one angel admitted, revealing how Doug's intimidating presence lingered even after confirmation of his death. On August 7, 1986, Doug was laid to rest at Oakland's Evergreen Cemetery. Rather than joining the general population, he received space in an area reserved for fallen angels, an honor that confirmed his standing within the organization despite the circumstances of his death. The funeral drew angels from across California, along with other figures from the outlaw motorcycle world who came to pay respects to a man whose reputation had extended far beyond his own club. At merely 40 years old, his legend had already outgrown his life. The small-town swimming champion had completed his transformation into an outlaw icon. His journey from academic achiever to feared enforcer complete. What remained unclear was whether his final act, dying alone of an overdose, represented a final escape from the demons that had pursued him since childhood, or a surrender to them. The question of whether Doug found peace in death would remain unanswered. But his legacy, both the man and the myth, would continue to echo through criminal folklore for decades to come, creating controversies that outlived the man himself. Legacy and controversy.
Agnew State Hospital was the third facility established by the state to treat mental illness. But just because Orr was committed to Agnew State Hospital doesn't mean he would stay there. On July the 10th, 1969, he and 7 others sawed through the bars on their window.
Even in death, Doug Orr refused to fade quietly into history. Rumors persisted long after his burial, with some believing federal authorities had faked his death. These conspiracy theories claimed he was locked in a cell in Colorado with the door welded shut, a measure supposedly necessary to contain a man deemed too dangerous for conventional incarceration. Such fantastic stories revealed Doug's psychological impact more than any reality. He had so thoroughly terrified the criminal world that many couldn't accept his mundane end. So Doug was a dream to many, and I'm also sure he was a nightmare to a lot of other people, George Christie summarized, capturing the duality that defined Doug's legacy. To some Hell's Angels, particularly younger members who never met him, he represented an idealized version of outlaw mythology, the ultimate enforcer who feared nothing and no one. To law enforcement and victims like Earl Hudson, he embodied the worst excesses of motorcycle club violence, impulsive, extreme, and nearly lethal. Perhaps the most fascinating controversy surrounding Doug's legacy was the question of authenticity. Had the insanity defense contained elements of truth? Was there something genuinely broken in Doug's mind from childhood, perhaps exacerbated by his teenage accident? Or was he simply a calculated predator who understood how to weaponize his reputation? Former associates remained divided decades later, some insisting he was crazy like a fox, strategic in his apparent madness, while others believed genuine psychological damage drove his behavior. The psychiatric evaluations themselves revealed this contradiction. While one doctor reported Doug's claims about seeing his father's ghost, another found him completely rational. This ambiguity followed him in life and death. Was Doug the calculating enforcer who built his reputation through strategic violence, or was he genuinely unhinged, a man pushed beyond psychological limits by trauma and institutionalization? Doug's legacy also raised uncomfortable questions about American masculinity and its potential dark side. His transformation from all-American boy to feared criminal suggested something disturbing about how easily traditional masculine virtues, discipline, physical prowess, loyalty, could be redirected toward destruction. The swimming champion's discipline became the enforcer's calculated violence. The boy's physical gifts became the man's capacity for intimidation. The student's focus became the criminal's single-minded determination. Within the Hells Angels organization, Doug's story became both cautionary tale and recruiting tool. Newer members were warned about the dangers of heroin through references to what happened to Doug, while simultaneously being encouraged to admire his fearlessness and loyalty to the club. This contradiction, celebrating a man while condemning his choices, reflected the organization's own complicated relationship with drugs and violence. Crime historians and motorcycle club experts continue debating Doug's place in outlaw motorcycle history. Some place him alongside figures like Sonny Bargers as essential to understanding the Hells Angels' evolution from a drinking club to a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Others view him as an anomaly, a uniquely violent individual who happened to wear Angels' colors rather than a representative example. What remains undisputed is the psychological impact of his reputation. Former San Quentin inmates, interviewed decades after his death, still spoke of him with a mixture of fear and reverence. The yard would clear when he walked through, remembered one, describing how even hardened killers stepped aside. Not because anyone told them to, because they wanted to. Nobody wanted those eyes on them. Perhaps the most profound legacy of Doug the Thug Orr was the question his life posed. What transforms a promising young man into a figure of terror? The contrast between the 8th grader giving speeches about the importance of reading and the man who shot Earl Hudson point blank with a shotgun defied simple explanation. Nature or nurture, environment or choice, psychological damage or calculated adaptation to outlaw life? The answers remained elusive, but the questions continued to fascinate those studying criminal psychology. In the end, Doug's story served as a dark reflection of the American dream turned inside out. A talented young man who applied his gifts toward destruction rather than creation. The the all-American boy became the quintessential outlaw, his journey revealing something uncomfortable about the thin line between society's highest aspirations for its young men and its deepest fears about what they might become when those aspirations are twisted toward violence.